I'm in my room, and my computer is turned on in front of me, and I have my microphone here. There's a notepad open with some notes about my podcast. It's time to rewind. It appears to be that they're open to the 15th scene of Memento that starts in color at 31 minutes and 30 seconds, with Leonard pulling up to Natalie's house and confronting her with a picture of a tied-up and bloody Dodd, and ends at 38 minutes and 21 seconds with Leonard laying in bed next to Natalie. There's also a Skype window open. Oh, hang on. Who is this?
You really don't remember me? It's Eric Deutsch, your co-host.
Oh, right. And who is this?
Hey dude, it's Molly. Again.
Oh, quite right. And of course I'm Bubbawheat, and I imagine I've told you about Memento, which is what we're here to talk about, like we always have been. Jumping right into this scene, this really changes the mood from anything that we've seen in this movie to this point. It immediately it has this like driving beat that's designed to put us on edge, even though like at this point we have no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a slow burn, this movie, up until this scene, right? And now, all of a sudden, some serious shit about to go down, right? He's at some point, we're going to find out he's going to really mess someone up named Dodd because of Natalie. We get more evidence here that Natalie is not who she seems. So this is sort of the plot thickens kind of scene that we're going to get into today.
Yeah, and I like that, as he's walking up to Natalie's house, like you can see him holding the Polaroid, quite possibly like he was holding it the entire time he was driving. And as he comes up to the door, we see him through this, this big door window that we can see him kind of head and shoulders. And then we're immediately come face to face, this close-up of the Polaroid that's just this bloodied face with the duct tape over the mouth like a hostage situation, and just in, Leonard's handwriting, just simply Dodd.
I love her casualness of like, oh, I guess I don't have to worry about him anymore.
Yeah, and of course, Leonard asked the question that the audience needs to know, that the audience wants to know at this point, too. And I like that Natalie continues to play the long con as she goes on with the lie, saying that Dodd was the one that messed up her face.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this point in time, this is the most amount of distrust that Leonard shows to Natalie at this point, because the previous two scenes with him and Natalie have been a lot quieter, more intimate, and he has almost blindly trusted her. I think mostly because of what he wrote down on the back of the Polaroid.
Yep.
Yep.
But because he doesn't have that note at this point here, he is, less trustworthy of her, and asks, how he can believe that. And she says that she came over right afterwards, as if that would actually mean anything to him with his condition. Because he wouldn't know if she came over right afterwards or 2 days later or anything. And this is, I think, the most upset and animated that we've seen Leonard to this point. And I think it's interesting that he brings up something that Teddy says earlier in the movie, but later for Leonard, that someone is trying to get him to kill the wrong guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a moment of kind of Natalie's true nature peeking through, because she is so excited as she asks, "Did you?" Thinking that he may have killed Dodd. And just, that feels so different than what we've seen from Natalie to this point, that she would get this excited about him potentially killing somebody else.
And he's rolling in pretty hot, too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is, again, kind of interesting in that he is searching for solidity so much, and he's running off of, what he thinks is intuition on people. And so, and again, like, he doesn't know the stuff that he's done before. So it's interesting to see these kind of gaps of connection that he has, that he's like, oh gosh, there's this guy, like, oh, it's connected to her. Oh, okay. Like, what have you gotten me into? And being like frustrated and having at least some sense that he can be taken advantage of, because he just is so simultaneously vulnerable, yet also kind of putting up this facade that he's like tracking things when he obviously is not capable of it.
Mm-hmm. And something else that I noticed, and I talked about it a lot with the first scene with Natalie, but I didn't really bring it up much in last week's episode. But Natalie is in complete control of this conversation, like from the beginning. Like, she is, she immediately deflects, saying that Dodd's the one that did that to her face. She diffuses the situation, she calms Leonard down, but she's never afraid of Leonard. Like, we don't really ever see any fear from her. She is really just completely in control from the very beginning, and I think that's fascinating for her character, and it really fits with the type of character that we find her out to be.
Yeah, her capacity to manipulate is really kind of fantastic here, because it isn't just about a vengeance play for her, but she also is opportunistic, which is a little slice of something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really great facial acting by Carrie-Anne Moss here. When she says, "I lost someone too," a little deeper into the scene, you can see the gears turning in her head on what she's going to set Leonard up to do.
Mm-hmm.
You can see, like, okay, he's hot right now, but he's not going to remember this pretty soon. What can I do now that I'll be able to play on later, so I can manipulate this situation for my advantage.
Mm-hmm. And I like how, she tries to tear the Polaroid of Dodd, and just like almost offhandedly, Leonard says, "You have to burn it," which is something that, we find out that is something that he knows or has learned through the repetition. It's a true fact. Polaroids are very difficult to rip by hand.
I think this is interesting because I think for her, it's twofold. One, it's the removal of evidence. And two, I kind of interpret it as I'm trying to calm you down and soothe you. Here, let me take the burden off your hands, and I'll get rid of it. I'll get rid of the memory for you. And so it's kind of this beautiful comment that you can't just crumple it up and throw it away. It's something that actually you have to take some real effort to destroy.
Like, shortly after that, Natalie tries to give Leonard some advice. She says, "Trust your judgment, trust yourself," which is the exact opposite of the advice of one of his tattoos, which says, "Don't trust." And I think you might initially think of that to mean don't trust anyone, but I think it also includes the concept of don't trust yourself either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of that is like, you can't trust yourself. You need to trust facts, which I think is why he's, obsessed with the documentation. And, of course, if you have a system, then the system only works, unless you uphold that. And when you choose to not uphold that, then, problems occur. The other thing I forgot to mention about burning is that there's a scene where he's burning objects that belong to his wife. And this is, again, that kind of allusion to not only him burning a Polaroid that we see later on, but also that in order to get rid of the memory, he has to he burns them. He's burning literal memories of his wife, or at least, accoutrements of his wife.
Yeah, it's like, things aren't really gone unless they're burned, cleansed by the fire, as it were. And then we get this great moment of Leonard talking about things that you know for sure. And again, this kind of goes back to the concept of like with his memories of his wife. These are simple things. Like, how something feels whenever you touch it, the weight of a glass ashtray. These are things that most people just take for granted. But for him, it's one of the few things that he can rely on in his memory, because he cannot rely on himself to make new memories, to remember events. He can only remember, it's the different type of memory. He can only remember these, not facts, but he can only remember things that he knows to be true. And then that kind of leads him into the things that he is able to remember, which includes the memory of his wife. And then that kind of, he came in angry, and then relating himself to the memory of his wife kind of brings him into a spiral of sadness, down from anger. I feel like this is the point where Natalie's opinion of Leonard, or how she feels about Leonard, turns in a good way from her point of view. And to this point, she's really been using Leonard for her own purposes. And as an audience, and as we've talked about this, we've already seen Natalie as someone who's being kind to Leonard. But from her point of view, she really hasn't been until, I think, this point. And what do you think it is about kind of this scene and her seeing these tattoos for the first time that kind of changes her attitude? Or do you think that this is also, there's still an element of manipulation? Or do you think that Natalie really is growing some empathy towards Leonard in this scene?
I interpret it as she does have the capacity to have empathy for him. And I think she is moved by it, because it is, when she says that they're freaky, they are. It's an intense thing. He's got intense facts, written on his chest. He has trauma literally etched on his body. And so I think as another human being, as opportunistic and manipulative as she is, I think that she is also overwhelmed with the truth of it too.
Yeah, well, we saw a couple of scenes ago in the diner that she has the capacity for empathy for him. Over the course of that scene, I had mentioned how it seemed that she started out that scene with a pretty acidic attitude that very softened even by the end of the scene. So she has the capacity for sympathy. And I think when she's first seeing his tattoos, she's recognizing that this guy is damaged goods, and there's a just being a human feeling bad for him. But I think that also those kind of emotions, though, are kind of getting in the way of what she wants, though, because to the point I made a few minutes ago, she then talks about losing someone. We get the introduction of Jimmy when she shows the photo, and the wheels start turning of getting back to using Leonard for her own purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting that the first one that she sees and she takes him again up to a mirror is the one, his his upper chest tattoo, the John G. raped and murdered my wife. And that's kind of her first experience with these tattoos. And then she takes the shirt off, and again, we get this moment of intimacy. This is them kind of sharing this emotional intimacy between the two of them. And again, this in this scene, just like the next morning, as she runs her hand across the chest. I didn't mention it last week, but specifically the tattoo that she rubs her hand across is, the tattoo that says "Find him and kill him."
Mm.
And I do think that is important because, we don't really know exactly how much Natalie knows. Like and she'll say it just a little bit later in this scene, that she knows that Jimmy went to meet Teddy and never came back. And so we know that she knows of this Teddy, but we don't know if she knows exactly who Teddy is. And we don't know if she has or will make the connection between Teddy and John G. until she actually gets the license plate number back. But I do think that the wheels are turning with her, and especially with that "Find him and kill him" tattoo.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that there's a genuine moment that she has in terms of compassion, but I think you're right. I think that when she kind of sees the lay of the land, so to speak, then she's like, well, there is a way that I can leverage this for myself. I think it's kind of interesting here. We had talked about it before in previous weeks, that she kind of touches like over his heart and is like, what's going to go here, basically. And he was like, well, maybe it's for when I find him, that it's the spare spot. And then you do see a picture of him, later on where he's kind of pointing to it. And so there is this little bit of sadness where, Teddy is being someone around, if you, believe him in that, who was around since, the real investigation started, that he didn't uphold that for him. He didn't say, hey, look, no, we did actually catch the guy, you can etch it in now. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I do think it's also important that he doesn't, like, whenever he says maybe it's for when I find him, there's a lot of hesitation with how he says that. He's not like, he doesn't say, like, as a matter of fact, oh, it's for when I find him. He said, maybe it's for when I find him. Like, he's very hesitant because he's not sure if that's what the blank spot is for. It's just his best guess at this point based on, the facts around him.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get the origin of the note, where she basically tells him about Jimmy and how she lost Jimmy. She mentions that Jimmy went to meet Teddy and never came back, and that's kind of adds another piece to the puzzle of why Leonard may have killed Teddy. Because at this point on the first time watch, we hear the word Teddy, we hear the name Teddy and we immediately connect it to Joey Pants. And the first time watch, I think that it's not too much of a stretch to think that, yeah, Teddy's the one that killed Jimmy, and maybe Teddy is a bad guy. And that's why Teddy got killed. Because we're getting all these pieces, but there's still pieces missing, so we're not getting the full picture. And kind of just like Leonard and his facts and tattoos, that these facts can be leading us in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like just a slight time jump, and it cuts to the two of them in bed, and it's a little bit darker. So what do you think happened during that time jump? Like, do you think anything happened? I mean, there's definitely, I mentioned in the last week's episode that they wake up in bed, but I think it is pretty clear that they didn't have sex. Like, you don't get that vibe at all, right?
I agree. I don't get that vibe.
Yeah, I don't think they did. I think what it kind of more reads like is people who are really engulfed with talking over a long period of time, because she's kind of like, he's sitting up, it's not like he's laying down and, like, okay, we're going to bed now. Like, he's sitting up and talking. So I almost interpret it as they've been talking for hours, they've been connecting for hours, and she just happened to kind of snuggle up with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so this scene has the comment that I alluded to in the last episode, where Leonard says he doesn't even know how long it's been since Catherine died.
Mm.
And he says, how am I supposed to heal if I can't feel time? Which is very brutal.
Yeah.
And he figures that comment to me says, if it's been years since she died, maybe he could move on. But if it's only been a few months, then there's no way he can. And so since he doesn't know how long it's been, he can't possibly heal. He can't possibly move on. And so that ties into what I was saying in the last episode of how if it has only been a few months, he can't be intimate with another woman because it's just too soon. And he doesn't know how long it's been, so he's just going to default it, well, I don't know that it's not only a few months, so I have to just assume it is only a few months.
Yeah, and for Natalie, it's only been a couple days.
Right. Yep.
And I think that also, that ties into the phrase, time heals all wounds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But how is he supposed to heal if he's not able to experience time?
Right. You can't have the wounds heal if time heals them if there is no time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, if you're not creating any more meaning making past your last memory, which is one of trauma, how are you supposed to heal from it?
Mm-hmm. And I think that this is like a very touching moment, and it's a very like sweet moment, and this moment of connection, it really makes the audience feel for Leonard and his condition and his situation, and by proxy, because we do, like, Leonard thinks that Natalie is asleep and he's kind of talking to himself. But we find out that Natalie is awake and she's hearing this. So it's building that connection between Leonard and Natalie because they're kind of experiencing similar situations because they've both lost somebody that they love recently, or at least to them it feels recently. For Natalie it really is recently, and for Leonard it feels like it's recently.
Right. Yeah, they're kind of bonding over grief. I like that he gets up here and she rolls over and feels the bed. It feels like where he was, just as he was talking about, excuse me, touching the side of his wife's bed and knowing that she'd been gone because it was cold. And that she kind of does, and Natalie herself does the same thing. So you can kind of see this mirroring of, Jimmy's supposed to be there and he's not anymore.
Yeah. And this moment is interesting for a couple different reasons. Like, for one, it's a little bit of Leonard kind of going back into investigation mode because he's kind of looking around and investigating in a way Natalie's room and the space that he's currently in, just kind of seeing what's around. And also, this is something that Christopher Nolan mentions in his commentary. This is really the only moment in this entire film where we see something from a perspective that's not Leonard's perspective. Like, we see Natalie touch the bed, but Leonard is in the other room. This is something that he is not aware of. This is like one of the only times we see something that Leonard as a character is not aware of.
That's a good point.
I think that builds this connection between Leonard and Natalie as characters with the audience, just in a similar way that we see connections throughout the rest of the movie between Leonard and Sammy Jenkins.
I think it's interesting that he processes this as she has also lost someone she will help you out of pity. And I feel like pity is kind of a charged word. It's not out of camaraderie.
Or even out of
It's not
grief.
right, or empathy. It's pity. I feel bad for you. So it has this really kind of like negative connotation to it.
Yeah, that it's not a positive word, pity. It's oh yeah, I feel much pity for you. It's almost like, it's almost a put down in a sense.
Mm-hmm. And then one other thing that I noticed, which is I'm not entirely sure if it's a continuity error or if it's actually supposed to be two different pictures. But if you notice that the picture of Natalie and Jimmy, in one shot that whenever Leonard is picking it up and looking at it, it's a different picture because Jimmy does not have any facial hair.
Yes, I noticed the same thing. When she first shows the photo of Jimmy, he's got the mustache. He comes out of the room at night. He looks at a photo. He has no mustache. And then when he writes his note on the back of the Polaroid, we're again seeing that first photo with the mustache. And so I didn't know if this was just an unfortunate continuity error that was missed in editing, or if we're just playing with the concepts of memory and perception here. Because Natalie's the angle of Natalie's face, I looked at it back and forth about 10 times in preparing for this episode to see how did Natalie appear in the photo or not. And her face is tilted a little differently. So I don't, the problem is if you're just doing it on one viewing, you may or may not even pick up on that. When you're doing a movie by minute, this is the kind of stuff you're looking for. So it's very interesting to think about whether or not that was done on purpose or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I noticed, which I can't get a good read on it, but the book, because I have noticed, I haven't brought it up, but I would say about 75 to 80% of the books that we see scattered around Natalie's house are all spine in. So we only see like the blank pages. We don't really see any spines of any books. We can see a few of them, but they're thinner books, so you can't really make out the titles on anything. And this was the first book that I kind of see any sort of detail. The book that he sets the Polaroid on as he's writing, and the only word that I can make out is Earthling. And like on one corner, which I'm not even sure if it's part of the book or possibly like some other postcard, you can see a hand holding a set of keys with like a key fob.
It's interesting. I think it was actually last minute when you kind of see the what do you call it, the headboard. I noticed one of the books had, as you were talking about, like the pages facing outward, like you don't see the spine, like someone had written on the paper. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I kind of have an association with like being in school and doing something like that, like writing on, and so, or I don't know, like from elementary school or something. But I'm like, I wonder if there's some sort of like educational reference with that.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot with like school library books. They'll kind of write on the edge like that, saying that it's a library book or what classroom it belonged to.
Mm-hmm.
He then just gets back into bed, and this again is one of the first times where the end of the scene, in a way, is almost completely different than the way the previous scene started. Like the connection between the scenes, there isn't really any repetition. Like he's in the same space, but at the end of this scene, he is laying down to go to sleep, and then at the beginning of the previous color scene is him waking up in the morning. And there's this is the first time that there's actually no overlap.
Right. It's technically like the same kind of time period.
Yeah, it's the same setting, but in all the previous scenes and in still a lot of the later scenes, there is some overlap. There's some like, line or moment that is completely overlapped, but this is the first one and quite possibly the only one, but I'm not for sure where there is no overlap, because there's just a connection of the two of them being in bed, but this one ends at night and then the previous one begins in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's all the notes that I have for this scene. Do either of you have anything else?
I do not.
Nope, that's it for me.
All right. Is Molly? Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Briefly about anything else in this movie that kind of stands out, like a favorite scene or any other theory that you might have heard or had?
No, I don't know of any other additional theories. I think upon watching, because it's been a long time since I've seen this movie, but I was really surprised about how much of a significant impression it made on me. And like I mentioned before, just how much I can see a lot of the ideas in Tenet in this movie, and that's pretty gratifying. But yeah, I guess I think the only thing that really hit me about this movie is like I don't know, for some reason, maybe memory being a thing, remembered it ending slightly differently. So I was a little bit surprised. It seemed kind of an abrupt ending to me. So it'll be interesting to hear once you guys get to that, what your take is on it.
Yeah, I always liked the ending. I appreciate where it ends, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into that chunk to wrap up this season, and looking forward to on all the other sessions talking about this movie, because it's been a lot of fun already, and I'm looking forward to a lot more great discussions. But once again, Molly, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and for the last time, why don't you go ahead and plug anything else that you want to plug and let everybody know where they can find you online.
So my personal website is mbailencreative.com. You can find me on Twitter at DharmaSodaPop. And I'm also the podcast producer for Wednesday Wake Up, and that website is wednesdaywakeup.com. And that's about the intersection of Buddhism and meditation and Western psychology. And so it's, if you're interested in mindfulness type stuff, it's a goodie. And there's some guided meditations on there too. So.
All right, and as always, thank you, Eric, for joining me for this half of this movie and all of these color scenes.
Oh, you're most welcome. Love being on. And by the way, yes, go to Molly's creative website. I own one of her mugs. Get one of her mugs.
Yay!
And I will say that I will do my best to watch Tenet before the recording of this season is over. And possibly share my thoughts if I can work it into a future episode. But as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. We have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and listen and share and talk about episodes as they come out, as well as have discussions about time loop movies and TV shows in general. And until next time, I believe I've told you about Memento.
Only every time I see you.
How am I supposed to heal if I can't feel time?